Good morning. I'm not going to call this best practice. This is really kind of comparing different people. And the thing you need to realize on this is the industry trying to engage in what the states are doing in the management of concrete pavements. Historically, that hasn't been one of our activities, and we probably ought to understand it a whole lot better than we do. So the ACPA, American Concrete Pavement Association, formed an asset management task force, and this survey was conducted as part of that effort. And I'm going to take you back just a little bit before that. In 2009, 2010, the old FHWA Pavement Preservation ETG, Expert Task Group, had a rigid subcommittee. And in 2009, we did a nationwide survey to find out what the states are doing. Again, what are the trigger values for actions on concrete pavements? At that time, we had about 38 of the states that responded. And what we realized, how complicated it was back then, was the states were way different on everything. We thought we'd be able to get some nuggets out of it, and we learned it was real difficult. But just want to let you know, that was done that way. That was done nationally. What I'm going to present to you now, there's 20 chapters in ACPA, and the goal of this thing was to get the survey instruments to the chapter personnel who would then go to the state personnel, so you got that communication. Because we had some chapter execs who really didn't interact that well with, not any issues, but they just didn't, that wasn't part of their normal stream. This got screwed up in the formatting, but what this is just showing is where you see those red dots, those are states that were done in both surveys. Again, the original survey went to all 50 states. The latter one was really focused more on the chapter states. And what I want you to remember on this, I use this slide a lot, and I just, when you get old, you start beating people to death over it. But when you talk about pavement performance, you have to consider every one of these aspects. And so everything we're going to be doing is we're going to be trying to figure out how to make that happen. Do I need to change my design? You know, my material's bad. The industry's in a really good position if our product's not performing like it should to fix it. And that's why we need to start understanding how, you know, what are the deterioration rates, how do those things work? This is probably the most used slide. This is David Lohr's slide, and shows what a great job they do there. But you can look at the different rehab activities. This is pavement age, this is percent. And what we would like to see is everybody to be able to produce one of those things. Because then we all know just exactly how the concrete pavements are performing, when the different activities are being done. So we kind of naively went into this thinking that, you know, that would all fall out very quickly. And what we find that that's not really the case. So this is a Mike Darter slide from a study done probably in the 90s. Mike likes to do the survival percentages. So what you're looking at is pavement years, and this is the percent have survived. So this gives you really the distribution. Everybody talks, well, like the average age is 8 years. Well, does that mean they all go 8 years and drop off the cliff, or does 70% of them make it? So when you start looking at survival curves, this is a very effective tool. I call these cumulative distribution plots, and I get involved in smooth specifications a lot, and that's how I try and portray the data. So as people run up and down on their smoothness scales, you can tell what percent of jobs are or not going to make it. So I just want, again, those were kind of our thoughts, so that we would see things like this and gather data like this. So when you're looking at a goal, these are the states that are actually surveyed here. I'm going to be presenting results from 19 states. We actually reached out to several states like California, Texas, and Florida are not chapter states. We didn't get all the chapter states filled, but just gives you some idea of what was done. What you're looking at here was the concept was 5 different what I'm going to call categories. The first one is the organizational setting. You know, where is the PMS unit located? You know, and I'm getting ahead of myself there, but pavement funding sources, what pots of money are available. If you've been around the pavement preservation business, you know that a lot of, when we talk about definitions, it really ties back to funding categories. And that, you know, for ourselves, that's one of the things we try and move away from. Then what pavement distress data collection is being done. Again, you understand on the industry side, many of our members are not aware of any of this. So for you guys, this would be a whole lot easier activity, and you're probably wondering, well, why even ask those questions? But on our side, we don't really know, and that's the idea was we need to start doing that. Then the pavement management operation, how does the actual program developed? So it's good to know how that goes. And miscellaneous was, there's a couple good questions that some people thought up near the end, so we added that category. How many people know the name of Thomas Edison's brother? That's the point of organizational settings. You know, is the pavement management unit really in a spot that they got a lot of stick, or they're just something that, you know, collection of data? So that was one of the things we were trying to figure out. One of the questions we had was asset management. You know, a number of years back, that was a pretty popular concept. So we said, does everybody have asset management? Is that what's going to control pavement management? So that's about what it looked like. I don't think that was any real surprise, to be honest with you. Location of the PMS unit. I actually used to work in DOT pavement management unit one time in my career, and this was actually a surprise for me. A lot of what we did was we gave some categories. Some of what shows other, I think, would have been fit in there, because they would say what they meant, and then when I'd read the categories that we provided, it would fit. But I just showed it like it was. But I really thought a lot might be in planning. In the old days, there was a lot of materials and construction, but you can see there's no real magic bullet there, at least on these 19 states. So I don't know if that hold up nationally, but for us, that was kind of interesting. Okay, the PMS operation, that's really the one. How does a program get developed? You know, what are the performance curves, those kind of things. That's what we're trying to get after. And that's what the survey question actually looked like. I've highlighted the ones in yellows because that's what we really were hoping to be able to figure out. And if you look at the third bullet there, is what models are used to predict concrete pavement performance and associated trigger values? Because when are they going to be doing the intervention? And that'd be the 1, 2, 6 bullet down. What are the approximate percentages of pavement interventions triggered by each of the different models, i.e. faulting, cracking? If you're going to try and improve your product, that's like the key thing you need to know. What is it failing as? Okay, so to get to that, some of the questions that were asked, and this one I can tell you for me was a real surprise. If you look down right here on the legend, that's the different software that's being used. You know, there's two dominant players. In fact, one of the things we do, Agile Asset and Dayton Associates, were both kind enough to put on a webinar on their product for ACPA so we could better learn pavement management systems. And I expected them to be two colors. And you can see for the ones that we looked at, they're pretty, you know, all over the place. So there is no dominant, at least at this point in time. The other thing, notice when you see a number out front, that's the number of years that particular software has been in use, and then in parentheses, how long that state's been doing pavement management. So when you look across there, there's a lot of really mature pavement management systems, but there's also seems to be a trend to go to newer software. So I think that's something I think comes out of this. Okay, again, one of the things we were after is performance models. I'm not going to run through those because, again, in 2009 and 10 survey, we fell down on this. This is another one, you know, there's more information, but if you're on our side of it, you're still struggling is what does all this mean? You know, how do we get at this? But you can see all the different models. Anytime somebody sends me a 2-page decision tree and goes, here's our system, you know, my eyes glaze over because I get lost. I don't know how to relate that back to the product. So reporting frequency, you had the 2 down here, you can see on the legend where it's annual. And one thing I want to make real clear, if you've ever done surveys, you know, there's times you go and you'll see a comment on the end of this one, like, man, I wish I hadn't asked the question that way. Because you don't know if you had a bad question, there was a bad interpretation, or it's a bad interpretation of you on their answer. And this is one of the ones, again, I don't think it was that productive. But as I think about it, you know, because we didn't ask cost data or performance model, and I'm almost positive that every single DOT puts out an annual report. And one says, well, I do a spreadsheet, so they don't call that a report, but it really is. But so that wasn't really useful. This one, for me, was real interesting because it says, okay, you've got your model, whether it's a decision tree, or whatever you have, how often do you update it? Because if you haven't updated in 5 or 10 years, are your pavements really performing still to that model? So that was one of the reasons we asked that question. Like I said, I'll just let you look at these as it go around. This was the biggest disappointment. Again, what industry needs to know, what's triggering the failure on our products or the need for intervention? Because can we make it better? How do we go about that? And if you look, the reason this says 100% of the projects are triggered because they use a decision tree. So it doesn't matter how they're performing, it's always going to be 100%. This one right here is a materials related issue. So that's a very good number. So we know there we got to go fix something. And then, you know, David Lohr's up there and he's got really good numbers. But outside of that, I actually don't think the owners knew what was triggering them. And so that's one of the things that we're going to start working on. Can we figure out how to find these kind of things out? The linkage between the maintenance costs and the pavement management system, again, this is more of a yes or no. Where it says crudely, I'm pretty sure our chapter exec filled that in. I don't think the DOT would have responded that way. So again, this is one of those ones that I think the question was maybe more ambiguous than perhaps could have been or should have been. Okay, implementation. This was one I thought was going to be really interesting, and I'm really glad the way it came out, because if any of you have ever built a program and then watch everybody else hack it up, and then we all talk about preserving things, and someone decide to cut the budget in half, and they, you know, pick projects. So if you've ever been that road, you know what that means. This is what the question actually looked like, and bear with me here. I think there's maybe one other I'm going to read to you. But what we tried to do is categorize it into 4 groups. And the top 2 are central controlled, essentially, and the bottom 2 are district controlled. But I'm going to read them to you. Annual program is developed by central office for statewide application and sent for districts for implementation. What that means, I got, you know, the front office is the bully. They know best. They're just going to go do it, and your job is to execute. You know, obviously, there's always conversations, all that stuff. Second bullet is annual program is developed by central office for statewide application, is sent to districts for review and comment. Final prioritized list is project and strategies jointly developed. I really thought that one would be a big one, the biggest actually. The third bullet is annual program is developed by central office for statewide application and sent to districts for consideration. Districts develop final prioritization. I mean, it's my district. I know my roads best. I like your suggestions. We'll use them, but we move on. And then the last one was the districts actually use the PMS and develop their programs directly. Well, that's what it looked like. It's actually a pretty good balance. You know, they're showing you the percentages, but there's a, you know, if you had to fall on one side or the other, it seems to be that the districts are in more control than central. And for me, that was a bit of a surprise. I was expecting the opposite. Again, I think the only reason that one's there is I think that one was categorized wrong. Okay, the other question for concrete is what distresses are being collected? One of the things that concrete people all want to talk about is deflection. So one of the questions always crosses their mind, does anybody measure deflection? And so that's the questions you're looking at there, because what we're trying to, again, get back to what models are being used, what models are being triggered, and how is it being done. So those are, I'm not going to read these to you, but those are questions that were included in that aspect of it. And so when you look at that, again, this is one of the ones that's a lot more difficult because, you know, there's a lot of different approaches to this. When you see M, that means the state's got a lot of distresses, and it's done for different reasons. Some of it's done for maintenance. But the other thing to note, for the new Pavement ME design guide, you've got faulting, ride, and cracking. And you're designing the pavements with those 3, or predicting those 3 distresses. Can we get by with just those? And a real common element in almost all of these are these 3. So when you take a step back, can we get by with that? And, you know, the other ones should be collected. I'm not advocating not, but that's one of the things that we'll look at in the future, see if there's interest in that. So again, how the data is collected, is it being done in-house, is it being contracted? And the reason for asking that kind of a question is there going to be, anyone's ever bought new equipment knows you've now got 10 years of data and the new equipment may operate a little bit different. Are you going to get a bump? So how is that being accounted for? And our concern was, well, if it's contracted and every 2 years it's a different contractor, how are they, you know, guaranteeing the quality of the data? So that's what we're looking at. Again, there wasn't anything great to show there. The green is the in-house, the gold is the contracted. I'm making this up, but my belief is, because I talked to some of the people, is the contracting out is probably going to become more common. Deflection testing as part of the network level data collection. Only 2 states. And actually I was surprised it was even 2. So, you know, where I came from, we always did it as part of design. Most all states do it as part of design. They don't do it as part of network. So, but like I said, 2 of them do. Miscellaneous, these are 2 questions, you know, and these were actually good questions to ask, and that's why we kept them a little bit separate. What are the perceived risks of using concrete-based strategies such as new construction and preservation. So that's like asking for an insult, and we knew that, but that's what you have to do. And then the other one is, did you or will you use your pavement management data for calibration of pavement ME? And that question was a little bit of a surprise. So the idea is barriers to using concrete. So if you're, it should be going here. If you're, on the agency side, you just kind of brace yourself, but I thought they were really good responses. Failures are very expensive. If you have you saw the demonstration, those of you, how many saw the demonstration out there yesterday? Okay. Where we had that fake slab replacement, you're never going to do that cheap. If you've got slab replacement, it's a costly operation. One of the other things that came out pretty clear, and it'll be one of these other bullets, the maintenance activities oftentimes do not have people trained to do concrete repairs. Materials related distress is that second bullet. You saw that one where 75% of the trigger was on joints. That was a materials related distress issue. So that's true, and we know, I said you can see it. So those are things the industry needs to improve on. Inexperienced personnel for new construction, what they're saying there is, well, we don't have the old time inspectors that really can assess a good quality product. So that, those are things to be aware of. Districts that lack concrete experience, again, that's more on the maintenance side. Will it last as long as we think? If you're designing it for 30 years and it's not going to go 30 years, again, the expensive fix. So those are some of their concerns. Knowing when preservation is not an option. I would have never thought of that question, actually. I thought that was a really good question. At some point in time, it's too bad. It's just like when to trigger, preservation. The other question is when not to, and that probably needs to be asked and discussed more often. High cost of maintenance and construction issues like phasing, traffic control. We use 2 cop cars, Scott. One to sit there without a driver, and the other one to go get the donuts. I'm just kidding, come on, I'm just kidding. Okay, using the pavement management data for calibration of pavement ME. Again, this one for me was a little bit of a surprise. It really hasn't been done well, and maybe that, again, was a question asked right. I'm not sure on that. I was actually expecting a lot of people to say, yeah, that's what we've been doing. So, but it doesn't indicate that, at least to me. Okay, what we didn't ask, and you notice the one guy's got the blindfold, and that's me. At the time, we weren't too concerned about visualization capability. They also do right-of-way imaging and everything else, and that really, we were just focused on pavements. 2D versus 3D data collection. I think in the near future, when it's talking about contracting out, I think that's really where the future's going. We don't understand all that yet, so we're trying to come up to speed and learn about it. And then what I showed here is perhaps mulligans. On the performance thresholds, what's triggering the projects? Hopefully I showed you, we still don't know that very well, and that may have been more an issue with the survey, but that's something we're going to try and figure out as we go. Reporting periods for distress versus funding. Again, the funding thing, you notice I didn't even talk about the different funding categories because that was all over the place so much, and many definitions are quite different that we couldn't really put it together. So, analysis of segment links or dynamic segmentation, we didn't really ask questions like that. Are you doing it over a mile? Are you doing 1/10 of a mile or 88 feet? Those are things we never got into. And what is the time lag between when PMS identifies a trigger to when the construction's actually doing it? From our side, that's a pretty important thing to know. We didn't ask that question, probably should have. So what are the opportunities for the industry? Now, these are industry responses. These wouldn't be you guys, but this is things that we probably need to know. We need to better understand how each of the concrete strategies is modeled and how each strategy, new and preservation, performs. Deterioration rates, new pavements, old pavements, Dalbar retrofits, what showed you in David Lohr's slide, that's the kind of information that we need to know, and actually the owners need to know that. We need to know what distresses are triggering them. If it's materials related distress, that's a solvable problem by the industry. So those are important things to learn. How to create performance curves for strategies that may currently not be used in a given state. There's a state, I had a chief engineer tell me the Dalbar retrofit doesn't work. There are 7 million of them in this country, and I'm just kind of like looking at them and I'm going, well, okay, if we were going to do DBR in your state and you want to include in your pavement management, what would I tell you for a model? Because we're starting out, it doesn't work. So there's got to be some way to have some curves, some performance data, and address some of these issues. Understanding the value of probabilistic and deterministic approaches 10 or 15 years ago, there's a lot of discussion on that. It seems that most people today are more deterministic, but again, that's if you got a data-rich environment, probability comes in there quite well. What is the best time to forecast out? One of the really interesting comments that I hadn't really thought about is one individual came up and said, well, if you forecast out 50 years, you don't really need to do anything because it's just whatever your model is, gives you the answer. So there's got to be some happy balance of how often you update your model, how far out you predict, and I had never given that any thought, so that was a good learning curve. We don't know typical maintenance costs at the agency level on the different concrete pavements. You know, quite frankly, many of them, it's only emergency maintenance. But that's something we should get a better handle on if we're going to help in this. We don't know, deflection is not typically collected for pavement management. Concrete people think we own deflection. So if nobody's testing for it, maybe there ought to be a structural measure on that triggers some of the concrete activities. So that, just so you know. Also promoting more common terminology. As you went from state to state, again, definitions of preservation oftentimes are clouded with funding categories, so it gets real hard to know what's being done by whom. So if we had more standardization, that would help. What are the important the stresses for strategy performance? That's something we need to know. Here's the hope. That was all the woe is me. Here's different opportunities to get a data-rich environment. And so I'm just going to leave it because we're right out of time. But quote of the day, notice that's Harper's Weekly, September 18th, 1869. This is 2016, it's 125th anniversary of the first concrete pavement in 1891. But this quote is, and the inference may be drawn that the question of expensive construction and repairs is not the only important economical question involved. I mean, the impact on the business owners, the community. So even back then, those people were thinking of all these things that we think we're just thinking of. So that was close, wasn't it? I was running out of breath here. Any questions? I know we got time, but I'll be glad to. I can push over roll up if you want. You missed a lot of fun yesterday, Scott. Well, thank you then.